button.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to this very special incident of Blitzkrieg. This is more or less a rebuttal episode in regards to some of the arguments we made towards the Eldar war machines, which a few people are, quite frankly, a little bit upset about.
I figured they would be a little bit upset about it, but okay. So let's go over a few things here. The first and foremost is that a lot of people are defending the Wave Serpent as a viable vehicle. First off, since the 1980s, we have determined that any vehicle must be capable of fighting a tank. Period. That is why the Bradley, that's why the Soviet BMP, that's why even the German tankette, the Weasel 1, is capable of carrying an anti-tank missile and shooting it. Because here's the deal. When you take a tank into a battle, you on average take a platoon of soldiers. Those platoon of soldiers need transportation to keep up with the tank, so you take 4 armored fighting vehicles. We used to refer to them as APCs. Nobody uses APCs anymore in a modern military because APCs are pretty useless because all they have is a machine gun. They're a glorified 2.5-ton truck with armor, and we don't see any sense in that. The Eldar apparently still do. And that's a big problem. Because they're still in the idea that APCs are a viable primary infantry transport, and they're not. Because when you take 4 APCs into battle for every tank you have, the odds of your APC needing to kill another APC or tank go up astronomically. So every single one I can think of, even the Tankette Scout Weasel can equip missiles. Even the Panhard VBL has a choice of equipping a 25 mil autocannon, a 30 mil autocannon, or a quad missile pack. And it's a glorified up-armored Jeep. Not even a Humvee. It's a glorified up-armored Jeep, and it carries anti-tank weapons. So, yeah, it carries 4,000 rounds of ammunition. But between the Bradley's primary gun, 25mm cannon, its coaxial 7.62, a tow missile, and the fact that Commander often takes the optional 50 cal machine gun, or let's go with the Chimera. Let's go with the Imperial Guard Chimera as well. Multi-laser or autocannon, heavy bolter, plus all the las guns that the Imperial Guardsmen shoot out the back. Even the Tau Devilfish carries anti-tank missiles in the form of seeker missiles. And the Tau firmly don't believe in giving multiple roles to the same unit. That's why all their infantry carry just rifles. I can't justify that. And then there's... Someone actually tried to argue that a Wave Serpent can outrun a missile. They specifically registered the tow missile.
What's the top speed of a tow missile?
Top speed of tow missile is 320 meters per second, or 1152 kph.
And what's the top speed of the Wave Serpent?
800 kph while in flight.
Yeah, there's no way it's outrunning a tow missile.
If you want spite purposes, the Russian 125mm forget how to pronounce the name. It starts with a K, but it's the missile that the T-90 fires out of its main gun. Flies at 2,000 kilometers per hour once it gets up to speed, or just over the speed of sound.
And this thing's not breaking the sound barrier.
Not breaking the sound barrier.
Now, I do want to point out, looking into the way, so they can actually have the option of taking on the turret missile launchers or star cannons, but the main chin-mounted turret, it tends to be the twin-link shuriken catapults, and I see a lot of Wave Serpents just carrying shuriken cannons on the turrets as well, which are just heavy caliber machine guns.
All the pictures I could get when I brought it up just showed the top turret having the twin-link shuriken cannons. So it's basically carrying 3. The equivalent for a modern vehicle would be 3 20mm cannons, or it's carrying 3 multi-lasers. And I'm like, that seems like a terrible idea.
3 multi-lasers? Who made this vehicle? CS-GOTO?
The next thing is a lot of people are arguing that Wraithbone is the substance that we can't break down and analyze. Well, no, I didn't actually break it down and analyze it. Games Workshop did it for me. There's a lot of stuff in the Tau Craft World books, in the Tau Codexes, in the novels, in the Games Workshop official materials, and the Forge World materials that tries its best to explain what Wraithbone is. At the end of the day, the explanation is it is a grown, genetically modified bone.
It is organic material.
At the end of the day, it is addressed as being organic material that is stronger than most metals. Okay, I can live with that for the most part. Except for part of its strength comes from the pilot's psychic will. And my understanding of all the material the Games Workshop has put out on Psykers is as follows. During combat, they have less chance of getting their powers to work because they are under duress.
And let's be honest, if you're going to be the pilot of a Eldar vehicle, reinforcing the armor with your mind, and then you have a couple of near misses from about 3 or 4 crack missiles, you're going to be not concentrating fully. Now, bear in mind, I understand that the Eldar are supposed to have a much superior insight and superior brain compared to humans. Fair enough, but at the same time, you cannot tell me that they are not going to be a little bit freaked out, even just a minuscule amount. And that minuscule amount, it's all it's going to take to reduce the effectiveness of the Wraithbone armor from being 100% to around 80%, 50%, 20%.
Now, here's the other factor you have to remember. Even if... Now, the references I found for their cockpits and that thing that looks like glass is it's a reinforced, bullet-resistant glass variant of Wraithbone. That's a huge issue because that means that it's actually not as strong as regular Wraithbone. And on top of that, every single time while driving a tank that you hear a ting, a thud, or something big and heavy hit the hull, the driver takes a second. Every person in that vehicle takes a second and looks and makes sure that there's not a hole there. He's not going to be able to focus. Every time he takes a hit, his armor's going to get weak for a second while he looks over to figure out what's wrong. Or if anything is wrong. On top of this, he's got to fire his gun, which we took that away from our drivers for a reason. It's a terrible idea to give the driver of an armored vehicle a gun because it means that they're going to drive the vehicle like a fighter craft, which isn't going to work out too well for them since they have to avoid hitting rocks, ramming other vehicles, staying in formation, all these other factors that go in when they're driving. You want that driver doing one job, driving. But even, let's give him the superior mind, say he can split his focus. Okay, fine. Every time his cockpit shield takes a hit, he's going to look up and make sure it didn't crack. That's a split second in which his armor is weakened, in which his ability to focus on what's going on is weakened.
Also, bear in mind as well that any material that's transparent is going to be inherently weaker than opaque material, because if it's letting light through, it can let other things through. Let's be honest.
Exactly. And I went back and rechecked some measurements and some drawings I took of the Eldar vehicles. The way their ventilation system is shaped with that cone area underneath the vent that leads into the vent, any round that hits that cone region is going to ricochet into the vent if it doesn't penetrate the armor. Let me explain how vents work as far as protecting a vehicle. They don't. That's why if you look on all fighter craft, like particularly modern fighter craft, the vents are as small as possible underneath the fighter craft because most oftentimes enemy pilots attempt to engage you from above and recessed back so that even if you're engaging from below, you still have to hit further back in order to get into that air intake, because any uncontrolled explosion inside a combustion engine, which for all intents and purposes, if you have an air intake, you're using a combustion engine, at least as far as I know, and even if you're not, it's still an uncontrolled explosion inside your engine. Any uncontrolled explosion is going to cause that engine to detonate outward with more force than the actual engine was designed to withstand. That's why a freaking grenade launcher is so effective against lightly armored vehicles. It doesn't really kill, even if the crew inside can survive the grenades, the engine is going to be toast. And that's why on the back of our tanks, you'll notice, particularly modern tanks, you see this cage armor covering that air intake as much as possible. The Abrams only has 18 millimeters of armor over that engine, and that 18 millimeters, or 20 millimeters, excuse me, and 18 of that is that cage armor protecting it. This has no cage. This has nothing protecting that ventilation system. I have to assume the vent has 0 armor, because you have to make it permeable by air and water. If you only make it permeable by air, by the way, you create the problem of, if you inject fuel in and all the fuel doesn't get burned out, it can get stuck in the engine and build up, and then you have this huge deposit of fuel that suddenly ignites, and you have a massive backfire inside the engine that can just blow the engine up altogether. So you have to assume an air intake is permeable by water and air, which means water is a semi-solid object. Flamethrower liquid is a semi-solid object too. Flamethrower combustion, explosions are air objects. Fragments could get lodged in there, or actually just completely block the air intake. Or what's worse, air intake on the front means that, particularly if you're on the ground fighting, you run over somebody. They fly up. A Space Marine flies up and lands on that air intake. He literally weighs a ton. He weighs more than some of these Eldar vehicles weigh according to their specs. He's now blocking your air intake, or he just smashed through it and is now inside your engine, tumbling around, blocking all of the thrust. It's a horrific place to put an air intake. I'm trying to see if there's any other comments that I should address. But as far as Wraithbone is concerned, getting back to Wraithbone, it's Games Workshop and Forge World have done a very good job for me of explaining it's still a bone. It is still a biological material, which, while is very effective,
it's still going to be under the same stress that regular bone will be. It may not suffer to the exact same degree as bone, but at the same time, it's still going to splinter. It's still going to fracture, because that's what organic material does, quite frankly.
I see a lot of people mixing game rules with lore. I only use the lore. I didn't look at the game rules, because the game rules are established for balance purposes. I'm looking at what these vehicles are described as capable of doing and what are the actual specs given for them. If you're going to quote game rules to me, no, that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the lore of the vehicle, the lore of what is established, and the engineering specs that have been released. Everything they tell me is it is a bone. Bones break. I mean, I'm going to do an example right now. I'm going to jump. Now my shins hurt a little bit. That's because it's not just the muscle reacting to the impact, it's the bone reacting to the impact. Even my own body weight, and I weigh 71 kilograms, which oddly enough is as heavy as a wave serpent. Is that right?
That can't be right. Let's double check that, shall we?
Let's double check that.
If you weigh as much as a tank,
hang on a minute. Yeah,
I think we found another inherent flaw. If that is the case, no, it's 10 tons. The wave serpent.
Okay, 10 tons.
How did you get 7?
So a Space Marine going up into the air intake is a tenth of the vehicle weight. Your entire flight characteristic is thrown off by that. But I'm not using the and the argument is thanks to mobility. That say a wave serpent or a fire, not a fire prism, but the Valken doesn't have to fight a tank. That's incorrect. You can go 800 kilometers an hour. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now. Even in a modern tank battle, most engagements take place at less than 400 meters. At 800 kilometers an hour, you are not outrunning a a heat shell. You're not outrunning a kinetic penetrator from 400 meters. You're just not doing it.
You're not outrunning a tow missile either.
You're not outrunning the engagement. You are going to have to sit there and fight, at least temporarily, until you can get away. If you are not designed to take a hit or deliver one back to what you might have to fight, that's a huge problem. And the reason the engagement range is 400 meters is because even with all the technology we have, radar-guided shells, heat vision, night vision, scopes, what have you,
Not to mention all the advanced technology in 40k itself, in the lore.
you're still relying on your eyesight. Also, the average infantry engagement takes place at 38 feet. That means you want your wave serpent to get within 200 yards of the front line, where infantry are actively being shot at by tanks, and drop them off in order for them to get to the battle. Because the average engagement is 38 feet away.
Also, if people want to use a whole aspect of game rules and such like for the argument purposes, in game terms, that Wave Serpent and General Eldar tanks are going to be deployed on average about 30 inches away from your opponent's deployment zone. You know,
and I've actually broken this one down too. The average board for Warhammer 40k is exactly 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. 30 inches on a 48 by 48 board, assuming it's 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, is roughly 800 meters. No, it's not. Wait, it's 600 and something, but it's not very fast to move, considering that all that happens in a single turn of 40k is a lot. I determined either the rounds last several minutes of engagement, or a round of 40k happens in the blink of an eye and everyone is moving at superhuman speed. We went with, it lasts about 3 or 4 minutes of fighting. But at the end of the day, it still has to get close enough to drop off infantry. And it's not outrunning anything. Even if you want to say it outruns the Leman Russ, that's fine. It doesn't outrun a Predator. It most certainly doesn't outrun a Tau Hammerhead. And it will never outrun a railgun round. That thing travels... Our railguns on our destroyers travel at over 3,000 meters per second. To break that down into kilometers, you're talking several times the speed of sound. And there are predictions that in the next 20 years we could have a railgun firing at half the speed of light. You're not going to outrun that. I'm sorry, fans. I'm sorry, Eldar fanboys, but at the end of the day, lore-wise, everything I have in front of me, I did 287 pages of reading. That I looked that up before we started this. I went, how much reading did I actually do here for all the PDFs I downloaded? 287 pages of reading. No. The lore here, everything Games Workshop has established, I stand by what I said. Eldar vehicles, for the most part, except the walkers, are pretty crap. And even super space age material that is 10, 20, 30 times the thickness of steel is not going to withstand kinetic penetrators from a Conqueror cannon, much less whatever the Conqueror cannon space age Sabo is.
And considering the fact as well that, again, majority of Eldar armor is between 10 to 15 millimeters, which is less than on quite a few tanks today. It doesn't matter how tough the material is. If the material is that thin, it's not going to take that much to punch through. It's
the bones in my forearm, the 2 bones in my forearm. The average person has 15.5 millimeters of bone in their just going through the 2 bones in their forearm. By the way, I'm really tired, which is why I look really off. That's thicker than this Wraith bone is on the front of these tanks at the thickest point. And that's my little forearm. My bicep the bones of my bicep are almost 2 centimeters thick. Or just over it, depending upon how much you've built up your bicep. There's not enough material there to stop a round. Granted, bone is an extremely good at absorbing a shaped charge. However, it reacts very badly to the high explosive concussive force, and there's no way it stops kinetic penetration, as, modern bones shatter as soon as you hit them with a bullet. So, I don't, I can't justify these vehicle designs in any way, shape, or form. Like, with years of engineering experience, with all the college education I have, with all of the knowledge I have of biology, being a master's student for human sexuality and having to know all the stuff I have to know about biology, there is nothing here to justify these vehicles being designed the way they are. If anything, in my opinion, Games Workshop probably didn't talk to an engineer, a metallurgist, anyone with any combat experience, or any armor specialist in existence to get ideas for how to design these vehicles in a way that makes them at all practical. I hate to say it, the Eldar are dying out for a reason. Their designs suck.
Quite.
That's the truth. Their battle doctrine clearly does not match up with what would be considered a modern battle doctrine, and on top of that, their vehicle designs are just very poor for defensive purposes. A lot of people are trying to say holographic images and speed are defense, and no, they're not. We tried speed as defense. We really did.
And holographic displays only work when the sun is shining or without any moisture in the air. Once it's raining, that defense is gone.
Because as I explained in the other earlier video, water is a prism. Holographic displays are light. Prisms refract light in every direction and actually break up the light spectrum altogether, which is why when you shine, which is what creates a rainbow, actually. When you shine light through a prism, you get a rainbow. When you shine light through water, you get a rainbow. That's because it's breaking up the light's visible spectrum and causing it to shatter into every spectrum that we can see.
Bringing sci-fi lore into this argument as well is the reason why the Predator's cloak doesn't work when it's wet. It works on the same basis of bending light.
Exactly. And the holographic projectors have to be located outside the armor. Which means the first time that a near hit hits with enough concussive force to fracture the lens, the hologram is broken. They have to be, in order for a holographic projector to work, it has to be located outside of anything interfering with it. Which is why, actually, in the Games Workshop's lore, all these little crystals on the outside of this vehicle are its holographic projection crystals. An artillery round landing anywhere near this vehicle is going to shatter those crystals. Or at least fracture them. And if one of them fractures, the entire hologram is going to go down. Or at least a section of it is going to become not there anymore. I don't have anything else to say. These vehicles just don't... They don't obey any of the logic of basic engineering or basic physics when it comes to designing an armored vehicle. Not to mention the fact that they deflect rounds directly into their intake chambers, which is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I'm sorry, that's a stupid idea.
Exactly. I mean, and considering like the Venom as well, it's very similar in its design to the Eldar Viper, which is like a heavy jet bike. It's the equivalent of the Space Marine attack bike, but it shares more or less the identical body plan. So that's going to be deflecting rounds into its own engines as well.
I'm sorry, Eldar fanboys. I really am. But these are terrible.
And to say otherwise is heresy.
To say otherwise is heresy. That's a topic for another time. I'm not the final say on this. If you want to get another armor expert to look at these, go ahead. But if you're not an actual armor expert, if you don't have years of engineering experience, and if you don't have actual combat experience, then I'm sorry. It's the truth. These are terrible. Like,
I mean, don't get us wrong. If you can find like another engineer who can find a way to make these viable, that's great, because we're not opposed to being proven wrong. I just want to point that out there, if someone can actually prove us wrong with our arguments about the Eldar, without actually having any inherent flaws in that argument, that's fine. We're not going to be opposed to that. But just from our research, Eldar vehicles, very pretty to look at, but it's gonna have the durability, of toilet paper compared to something else. You know, I mean, let's be honest. I think the race that's got the best stuff so far. Who do you think actually has out of all the races we've looked at, whose armor is actually the most viable? Because I think it's actually the orcs, isn't it?
Sadly, yeah, it's actually the orcs who have the most practical ideas when it comes to armor. Their vehicles are fast. They have as much firepower as they can strap to them, and some that I didn't even think you could strap to it. And most of their vehicles have a bunch of armor slapped on them, and even if it's just, slapping additional patchwork plates on, you know what we call that today? We call that applique armor. The Chieftain from the Mark V through the Mark VIII had an applique shell that went over its turret. That was That was how it got its Chabum armor upgrade. Was you applied the applique armor? The Italian Ariete has applique armor on the sides and the sides of the turret that almost make its side armor just as strong as its front. And the Leopard 2 A7 has the Evolution armor package, which is applique armor on the sides of the side of the hull and turret that make the side armor as strong as the frontal plates. As far as thickness, the angle is not as good as the front plates, but thickness, yeah. And as far as I can tell from doing protractor measurements and additional research, even the angling on these vehicles is terrible. It either deflects it into these intake vents. One of them, I think the biological weapon one, the Void Spinner.
Oh yeah, the Void Spinner, yeah.
Its cockpit actually, unless you hit the cockpit dead center, it actually deflects the round right at the close air intake for every single round that hits it. No matter, almost to the point where no matter what angle you hit around the cockpit at, it's going to go right towards the air intakes.
In essence, just shoot the cockpit and you'll be fine. And considering that vehicle is shooting a biological weapon, it's
a high priority target.
Yeah. And not to mention, once it fires the biological weapon, if it's got anything wrong with the air intake, it's going to basically kill the crew.
What would probably happen is it comes down to if that biological weapon works under the heat of an explosion and continues to function, then everything around that tank is going to die when it explodes. And with the rounds being deflected into the air intake, that air intake is more likely to detonate than anything else. And considering the location of the air intake is directly under the turret ring, I've seen way too many pictures of tanks where an ammunition rack located next to the turret ring blows the turret clean off. Like, just completely off when the ammunition rack goes up. If that engine goes up, I'm guessing it's the number 3 engine. Number 3 engine goes up on the left side of the tank, it's going to blow the turret clean off. And there goes all your biological weapon right into the air, if it can survive the heat.
Which basically means everything around that is a circle of rotting, pestilent death, of which Nurgle approves.
So, I'm going to add this as an annotation to the other videos. Do you want me to... I think that's everything I've heard so far from the fanboys screaming up and down. Rainbow to me is definitely not practical because the pilot is required to reinforce it, and the duress you're put under during combat means that at best that's going to be a 90% reinforcement.
Let me just double check, see if there's any more comments on my end. No, there's nothing really on my end of videos at this point in time. So I think that pretty much covers all the arguments, doesn't it?
Yeah, saying a vehicle doesn't have to engage tanks or other armored vehicles, that doesn't work anymore.
No, not at all.
I mean, you know what? The Wave Serpent might be able to run away from a Chimera and get away with it. Fair enough. It's not going to run away from a Hammerhead and get away with it. It's not going to run away from a Devilfish and get away with it. And it certainly will not outrun a hunter killer, a seeker missile, even a crack missile. To give this a comparison, our man-portable Law light anti-tank weapon, the thing that airborne infantry carry as their light anti-tank weapon, flies at 2,000 meters per second. An RPG flies at 900 meters a second, both of which are faster than 800 kilometers an hour. You're not even going to outrun the random Imperial Guardsman pulling up and firing a crack missile. If he's got a bead on you and there's nothing stopping him, it's going to hit you. Unless you skillfully manage to avoid it. Outrunning it is simply not going to happen. And only having... I mean, I've gone over this so many times, but only having 12 millimeters of armor is paper. It's literal paper. It doesn't matter what it's made of. It's paper. Even our strongest metallic alloys, we still put a lot of it on there for protection purposes.
Just because it's more practical more than anything else. If you're going to have something that's, actually capable of deflecting rounds, just might as well make it thicker just to be on the safe side.
It's not only make it thicker to be on the safe side. When you design something, you design it for terms of effectiveness. That means that when we designed the M1 Abrams, we looked at the M60 Patton and went, how long has the Patton been a main battle tank in our service? 18 years. We need this thing to be viable for the next 20 years. And even then, we've upgraded it as time progressed with more armor, more weapons, better armor, so on and so forth. At this point, the original M1 Abrams didn't have a machine gun on top. Every Abrams I see now has 3 machine guns on top. There's a reason for that. We wouldn't just give it more DACA for no reason as human beings. We're not orcs. As cute of an idea as that is, tempting, but we're not orcs. We wouldn't just give something more DACA for shits and giggles. I don't know who designed these from a game designer standpoint, but whoever did really needs to go back and consult an engineer or an armor expert or a combat expert or even a metallurgist to explain to them that this is terrible. I stand by what I said. The Eldar vehicles are absolutely god-awful. We both wanted to release a clarification because I figured we would be doing this anyway because of the Eldar fanboys. I'm sorry, fanboys. Your vehicles are terrible.
And I just want to throw out there, this isn't just from people who hate the Eldar at all. I mean, we don't hate the Eldar. Well, don't know if you do, but...
My most enjoyable time, actually, when playing the Warhammer 40k games was playing the Eldar on the Dawn of War series because they were fun to play. Also, I really like the idea of either completely annihilating my opponent or immediately going, "Yep, I've lost the mission, time to start over," because that saves me a boatload of time.
Exactly. So we can understand if people were annoyed just because we were, out just to discredit the Eldar for shits and giggles. We're not here to do that.
No.
We're here on this show to prove, which race objectively has the best war machines from an engineering standpoint. Which machines are the most practical in a real-world combat situation. And
we're not using game rules for this stuff, guys. So if you're quoting me game rules, I'm just facepalming. Yeah. We're using the lore that Games Workshop has put out, the lore that Forge World has put out, and the lore that's in the codexes and whatever else we can find as credited lore that is supposed to be Games Workshop approved.
Exactly. Because let's be honest, according to the game rules, it's possible for potentially an Imperial Guardsman to be shot point blank with a bolter and survive. That's not going to happen in a real world situation.
Oh, he might survive, but he's definitely not going to have his right arm anymore.
Yes, but in game he can still fight.
Yeah, in game he can still fight, and
that's not going to happen in real life.
In a real world scenario, you get hit with a 20 millimeter, 30, 40 millimeter grenade. You're down. You're down.
And you probably bleed out more than anything, to be honest.
If the explosion and the fire and the fragmentation didn't kill you, the concussion will. Yeah, I really kept hoping every time I looked at a different Eldar vehicle that there would be something significantly different about it, or something that would make it stand out and make it worthy. That's why I was praising their walkers so much, was because their walkers actually are a very practical design for a mech style combat.
They're actually more practical than the Imperial walkers.
Not to mention the fact that that when I went and actually looked up the armor specs on the Warwalker, the one that has an open cockpit, it has thicker armor than the Fire Prism.
Which, now, does that sound that should be the case? Really, the Fire Prism, a big, heavy tank should have thicker armor than the light reconnaissance vehicle.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But
I mean, we can understand if the reconnaissance vehicle had light armor, that'd be more part of the course, because you are purely relying on speed, maneuverability to basically get in, observe, get out. You're not really, your weapons are purely defensive. You're not looking for a fight. But a heavy tank with a big cannon like that's going to attract all the attention of all the heavy armor on the battlefield, which in real world terms could be punctured by a bolt gun.
I can't justify that. I can't justify a lot of things on these Eldar vehicles from an engineering standpoint. They're the Warwalker and their Reaver Titan and a lot of their Titans, their armor specs, they had much thicker armor plating. Their armor plating was in much better places, and they just generally had better ideas when it came to actually placing armor. Not to mention the fact that the shape of the armor did not condone to actually causing rounds to ricochet off and damage other systems that are the armor supposed to be protecting. Whereas these were, I don't have any more to say. These are just
because regardless if it's game rules or law or whatever, if you actually sit down with the physical model and the angles deflect ammunition into...
I sat there with a protractor and graph paper and was just measuring over the models, and then found that the angle of impacts near the cockpit or near the front of the engine intake would in fact ricochet the round into the engine intake more than 80% of the time.
It's a fatal flaw whichever way you look at it.
That's beyond fatal. That is literally... That's engineering fail on a grand scale when this becomes the mass production model of your vehicle.
It's what people would like to call pants on head retarded.
And with that, I think we're done.
Yes.
So
this has been our little addendum video. And we'll see you on the next edition of Blitzkrieg.
I'll see you then. I pray that the next race is much better. We just wanted to release a clarification, guys. Anyway, this is Fiora signing out for right now.
We'll see you all again next time.